first of all, I think it's a thing that needs to be complimented that the young students, what is this called? Young? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, the young economists have thought of organizing a lecture on this topic. I think it's extremely relevant. Of course, there's no need to introduce Vamsi. Those of you who are first years, of course, Professor Vamsi was working here until recently. He just left for the US. He is now with the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's working with a new economics school which is known for holding very critical perspectives and very radical perspectives, offering alternative ways of interpreting away from the mainstream economics what is happening in the contemporary times with reference to alternative ways of reading development. With reference to the current topic, I think I must say that it was Professor Vamsi who introduced Das Kapital as a text here, and although we have always been using secondary texts and we thought that it might not be possible to really teach the entire text in a semester, we found that it was feasible, and we relished having introduced it. There's no repentance. Although maybe for students it's quite a tough task, doing an entire text, but I think it's worth the while precisely because of the fact that it gives you a certain system of understanding capitalism and capitalist development, which is just not possible through all the mainstream alternative framework. Even the Keynesian framework cannot really comprehend the kind of critical perspective that Das Kapital takes about the possible unsustainability of the capitalist process and the kind of conflicts and contradictions that are innate to it. It actually imagines the process as leading to magnification or intensification of conflicts rather than as a harmonious process of growth. It also has a very interesting ways of looking at categories, with reference to the kind of categories that we usually talk about in the mainstream economics, with individual as a unit of analysis or a behavioral way of understanding psychology, and through which we tend to imagine choices and then the effective objective processes. This has an altogether a very different way of interpreting in terms of methodological approach to the the whole process as well as categories of capitalist system. So I think with that those brief words, I would like to now introduce invite Professor Vamsi to come and thank you.
Thanks, Vijay, and thanks to the Young Economics School. It is a young school, the School of Economics. I hope it becomes mature and sustaining school over time. But it feels good to be back at the University of Hyderabad. I had a period of around 7 glorious years here teaching students, and I was telling a couple of students earlier that the one of 2 main regrets I had about leaving Hyderabad was leaving students, both MA students and also research students, and family. These were the 2 major sources of unhappiness about leaving. But having said that, you are very fortunate to have many distinguished professors teaching you very interesting things. You are very lucky to have Vijay here, who is very passionate about teaching. I have seen very few teachers who are more passionate about teaching than Vijay. and he's also somebody that has experienced not simply textual knowledges, but he goes to the field and learns from the field. So it's a combination of field level analysis and theory that he brings to the classroom. So I would think we are still very, very fortunate to have several distinguished economists here. About Kapital itself, what I'll do is the following. I will make 4 or 5 broad points that in my view capture the main message of Kapital, and stop with that. It will probably take about an hour to go through the lecture, or a little longer. Is that okay? Can you stand an hour on a Saturday morning? And after that, we can have a question and answer session. Any doubts, you can say, well, why the hell are we reading Kapital after 150 years? We should not. From that question to, particular nuances of arguments within Kapital, to the extent that I understand that text, I'm happy to, address the questions and, discuss further, some of the ideas. Okay, so the first, as by way of introduction, I wanted to say a couple of things. Why did Marx embark on this journey, right, of writing Kapital? And it was a very arduous journey. Can people at the back hear me? Sorry? Not so clear. What do we do with that? Okay. Can somebody take care of that? Switch off the fans and switch on the AC is the suggestion. Do people use a microphone in this classroom? No? I can't believe that other teachers have louder voices than I do. Maybe Vijay does, other than Vijay. Yes. Okay, is that better? Can people hear me better at the back? Okay. So, why did Marx embark on this journey? Right? There are multiple answers to that question, but let me give you what I found persuasive. This is a journey that Marx embarked between 1848, roughly, when he was exiled from Europe, until about 1870s. Right? In 1867, he published the first volume. That's what we are commemorating today, 150th year anniversary. And incidentally, it was in the month of July that Das Kapital was published, July 16. And so it's exactly 150 years. Right? It's the right time to remember this particular occasion. So, why did he embark on this journey? The answer that I found persuasive, among multiple accounts, is Marx was as much a political activist as he was a thinker. Right? He was not merely an economic thinker. He was also a political activist. And in 1848, all of you know, he and Engels wrote a very famous document called the Communist Manifesto, and it was not merely a pamphlet, for a small revolution. They were actually looking at a world revolution. And they were looking at revolution in Europe. And Marx and Engels were also active in participating in those revolutions. Engels wielded a gun, and Marx was actually involved in, the revolutions. And their revolutionary potential was recognized and feared by governments all across Europe, and they didn't want Marx or Engels to live in Europe any longer. So 1848, both of them were exiled from continental Europe. So at that time, as all of you know, England was a very confident country. They were the world imperialist power. They thought, they could handle a Marx and Engels. We rule the world. After all, what can two individuals do? So they let Marx and Engels into England. And around that time, Marx reflected deeply on why these revolutions failed. Why did the European revolutions fail? Why did the working class revolutions fail? And they came to Marx and Engels came to a conclusion that, while they understood the political aspects of what a revolution was, while they understood the cultural aspects, they did not very well understand the economic aspects, right? The aspects of political economy. And Marx felt that, without understanding the political economy aspects of how societies function and especially how capitalism functions, it was very difficult to stage a revolution and succeed at it. So he decided, let me use this period of exile to, study how the economy functions in capitalism, right? As capitalism was evolving, and he was also fortunately located at that time in the most advanced capitalist country of the world of that time, which was England. And as he observed England, as he studied England carefully, and as he studied political economy carefully, the great political economists before his time, people like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, most importantly, but also physiocrats, because physiocrats gave a very, very important idea to Marx that he developed much further. When he started reading, theories of political economy, and he started analyzing, social processes and economic processes in England, he arrived at this particular document called Kapital, right? So it was, in a way, a political kind of motivation that led Marx to Kapital, right? He wanted to, strengthen his own understanding of the world and stage a stronger revolution. The next time, working class was ready for a revolution, they needed to understand capitalism much, much better, right? So that was the underlying motivation. There are multiple accounts of why Marx embarked on this journey, but this is the answer that, seems most persuasive to me. And so, when we think of capital, the other, by way of introduction, is I wanted to make a second point. Once Capital was published, right, volume 1 was published during Marx's time in 1867, and strangely after that, Marx went into near silence, right? Did he publish any significant works after 1867? He stopped, he lived for 16 more years. But he did not publish any significant works after that. That doesn't mean that Marx was, not working on anything. In fact, through the 1870s, he was rethinking capitalism by, looking at less developed capitalist countries. Those days, he started analyzing Russia, very deeply. He learned Russian during 1870s, and he was analyzing Russia, and he was trying to think of multiple paths out of capitalism. So Marx was evolving during 1870s, but he stopped with Capital Volume 1. He just got, he wanted to, present a larger perspective, which he never completed before his death, right? So it's not that he was not working after 1867, but he didn't publish anything very significant after that. And after 1867, what did this publication do? One very interesting observation, again, I'm going to enter into a slightly hypothetical space here. One very interesting observation is political economy as a tradition, right, after Marx's publication of Capital, takes a back seat. Right? As a tradition, classical political economy, then Marx, then who else? Right? When you do political economy today, right, in HCU you are fortunate to have 2 political economy courses. No program in this country has 2 political economy courses. You are truly fortunate to have 2 political economy courses. Classical political economy is Smith and Ricardo. It ends with Ricardo. Marxian political economy is something that ends with. It doesn't end with Marx, but you start with Marx, and then there is a heretic tradition that continues. But the discipline moves away. Economics discipline moves away from political economy. What happens to economics? Neoclassical economics, the marginal tradition takes off in the 1870s and 1880s. So the interesting question there, and again, there is no conclusive answer because we simply do not know a lot of things about, some of these connections. The interesting question to pose is, did neoclassical economics emerge in response to Marx? Right? That's an interesting question, and there is no conclusive answer. But I found, a couple of things that, I thought I'll narrate very quickly. One of the 3 major founders of neoclassical economics, who founded neoclassical tradition, Walras, Jevons, and Karl Menger from Austria. I was visiting Tokyo 3 years ago, and I went to a university called Hitotsubashi University, which is a top economics university. And I was actually strolling through the library when somebody said, some acquaintance told me, since you are an economist, you may be interested in knowing that Hitotsubashi Library has 2 private collections. So I said, of course, I'll be interested. The 2 private collections one of them was Karl Menger's. Right? Karl Menger, who worked on the production aspects of neoclassical economics. And the second collection they had was Schumpeter's. They bought these 2 collections. And their entire private libraries are at Hitotsubashi Library. So I said, first I want to go and see Karl Menger's collection. So we went in. It was, it's a closed, door thing, and they have to open the lock. There's a lot of security. So I was allowed in, and they said, we'll give you 20 minutes. So I went through, the sequence. They had organized everything chronologically. So I went to 1867, and as you would expect, Karl Marx's Kapital, Das Kapital, the original German edition was very much there. And I opened the book and checked. There were very detailed notes. Of course, I didn't understand. I don't know German, but there were very detailed notes. So there is, this gives you a small hint that neoclassical economics, at least partly, arose in response to Marx. Some of the founders did know Marx and did want to respond. There's a second thing. One of the key influences, in the neoclassical tradition is an Austrian economist called Bohm-Bauer. And Bohm-Bauer, he was also the teacher, interestingly, of 2 very influential economists later. One is Schumpeter. Bohm-Bauer was the teacher of Schumpeter. Bohm-Bauer was also a minister of finance in Austria in the 1890s. And he was also a teacher of Hilferding, Rudolf Hilferding, who wrote this account called Finance Capital, which is extremely important for the Marxian tradition. So when Bohm-Bauer, saw the publication of volumes 2 and 3 of Capital after Marx's death, right? Marx had died, and Engels put together the notebooks, the rudimentary notebooks that Marx had prepared, and published them as volumes 2 and 3. So when you read volumes 2 and 3, they're not crafted, they are simply notebooks. It's like Marx went to British Museum Library every day, right? Every day of the weekdays at least, 5 days or 6 days of the week. And he worked for 10 hours or 12 hours a day. That's the kind of hard work that produced this kind of an account. For 15 years or 16 years with a magnificent mind. That's why you get a well-crafted book like Volume 1, but he also made notes for Volumes 2 and 3 and other things. And Volumes 2 and 3 were published posthumously. And when Engels published them in 1894, Bohm-Bauer pounced on those books, and he wrote a response. He wrote a book of his own called The End of Karl Marx's System. That's the title of that book. End of Karl Marx's System, of course, has two meanings. One is, the system that Marx was building ends in volume 3, right? So it's an account, it's a review of, the entire work of Marx under the title Das Kapital. So he's reviewing, Marx's whole system. The second account, that second meaning that you get from that is this is the end of Marx, right? So there was an attempt to end Marx. And what was the argument? He basically said there is something called the transformation problem, and Marx made a huge error, right? He transformed outputs, but he did not transform inputs. At least that was Bombawet's interpretation. And 130 years later, people are still obsessing about the transformation problem, right? It was an assault on Marx, basically. But there have been a lot of accounts showing that Marx. Some accounts that say that Marx did not make an error. Some accounts saying that while Marx made an error, the error can be easily corrected, right? Many of you probably went through the transformation problem, at least those students who are in the second year. So these are just two examples about how neoclassical tradition rose in a hostile fashion to Marx's publication of Kapital. Right? There was a certain fear associated with capital. What will this account do? Will it destroy capitalism? Will it destroy the discipline of economics? Will it destroy the society as we know it? And they were legitimate in fearing that way. The other major factor that led to the formation of the neoclassical tradition was, of course, in England at that time and Europe, working classes had become extremely radical, and they were waging their own struggles. And how do you move away from this class kind of understanding and move into an understanding about individuals, how they live in their own little worlds, the worlds of Robinson Crusoes, right, as Marx himself calls it, right, where you don't bother about others. What you do is, you think about what gives you pain, what gives you pleasure, and you become a machine, maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain. And then, then you construct the whole utility maximization logic and so forth. Ever since 1860s, 1870s, what you see is the tradition of Marxism, has caused that fear, has scared people, and as a result, there's always an attempt, right, in economics departments, regardless of where you go, including University of Massachusetts, where I teach. There is an attempt to suppress Marxism because it's too radical, right? The critique that Marx made of the system is so deep and so fundamental that the only way you can answer the critique is changing the system. It's too radical. How do you deal with it? If you want capitalism to continue, it's nice. I get a lot of choice. I get a lot of commodities. I enjoy myself. My desires get full expression, especially if you have some money and you have, you don't have a very limited budget constraint. You can enjoy in this system, right? So there has always been an attempt in economics departments and of course in the larger society to suppress Marxism, right? And so Kapital or Marx or Marxist works, when they get taught in economics departments, there's an attempt always to devalue. Right? Why are you reading Marx? Right? Why are you reading Marx? Is he not somebody who worked in 1860s, 1850s and 60s? How is he relevant today? Why are you reading? Is it not ideological? Is he not a political fellow? He is not an academic really. Since he is not an academic, he is political, he is ideological, why the hell do we read Marx? We should not. Right? And there have also been unfair and sometimes fair critiques of what Marx wrote, and there have been answers. There have been debates, but it's a long period of an attempt to suppress Marx and Marxism within different departments, different academic departments, especially economics departments. And when people survive through this assault, they become heretics. Right? So you have to say, well, I do believe in this heresy, and he did say something relevant. So the question that is before us today, when I gave this topic, and I also wanted to remember Das Kapital after 150 years with all of you, is there something relevant really? Or, are we simply being ideological and, propping up Marx without any analytical set of reasons? So I'll offer 4 or 5 insights, and it's a very large text, and we have about an hour. So let me not, try to summarize the entire text for you. And I don't even know if I understand the entire text, but to the extent that I understand the text, I will summarize 4 or 5 insights. Okay? And after that we'll have a Q&A session. So the first point, and this is, let me spend a few minutes on the method of Marx in Kapital. Right? Marx deploys multiple methods in multiple texts. What's the method that he uses in Kapital? Right? And to start answering that question, we need to ask the question, why did Marx start with the discussion of commodities? Right? Those of you who read Kapital, the first paragraph, the first chapter is on commodities, and the first paragraph, Marx makes a statement that, well, the wealth of all these nations, that we are attempting to study and understand is defined in terms of how many commodities they produce, right? The volume and, the value of the commodities that are produced. So, since that's how wealth is measured, let's start with the commodity. But is it that simple? He's just, drawing the reader in when he says that. Why did he start with commodities? That's not Marx's primary interest. Why did he start with commodities? If you look at Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, what does Smith start with? He starts with labor. Right? He starts with division of labor. He starts with the pin factory example. Right? You look at Ricardo. What does Ricardo start with? He starts with labor. Right? It starts with value. The first subsection in Ricardo's principles of political economy and taxation, it starts with value. So Marx is, in a way, when he starts with commodities, he also quickly goes into a discussion on labor. Right? So the first chapter is all about commodities and labor. So one way of thinking about it is, well, I belong to this tradition of political economy, and the great minds, the mighty minds of, as he calls it, the mighty thinkers of political economy, people like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, they started with commodities and labor and certain abstractions of that kind. So I'll follow the same tradition. That's one answer. There is a deeper answer, and that answer speaks to the question that I raised, the method of political economy of Marx. And to understand the method of political economy of Marx in Kapital, he doesn't offer you too many hints about what his method is in Kapital itself. You have to read it and you have to form your own opinions. But there's a different place where he lays out the broad method of political economy. There's a text that he wrote. Again, there were a series of notebooks that he wrote in 1850s. Please do switch off the mobile phones or put them in silent. It's an unnecessary distraction for other people. What he does is, he lays out some principles of political economy on how to approach political economy in this text called Grundrisse, which was published again much later, in fact in the 20th century. He had written a series of notebooks. Part of it, it's a very small section. You can go on the web and search for method of political economy and type Grundrisse, and you will get that particular section of Marx. And what Marx says is something very interesting. What he says is that when you study a country, its society, its politics and so forth, you have to ascend, and listen to this very carefully. You have to ascend from the abstract to the concrete. Typically, how do we use these expressions? We ascend from the concrete to the abstract. That's what we think doing social theory is all about. What Marx is saying is you have to ascend from the abstract to the concrete. So concrete is at a higher level and abstract is at a lower level. Just in terms of, it's an analytical use. You have to ascend from the abstract to the concrete. So what does he mean by that? How do you ascend from the abstract to the concrete? What he says is the following. There are some simple categories, right, that exist all around us. You have the category of exchange, you have the category of labor, you have the category of commodities, you have the category of money, right? These are all simple abstractions, right? And these categories have existed for a very long time. They didn't start with capitalism, right? These categories did not originate in capitalism. You go back to the Roman Empire, or you come to India in let's say 500 BC. You would see evidence of certain kinds of markets, rudimentary forms of money. These are things that our great historians, Irfan Habib or Romila Thapar, they've shown us about the existence of some of these rudimentary forms or simple abstractions that have existed for a very long time. You have had commerce for a very long time. You have traders for a long time. You have notions of capital for a very long time. Marx himself refers to it. Money lending capital, merchant capital. These are what he calls as antediluvian, ancient forms of capital. So you have to use these abstractions, right?